Thank you, thank you. Hey, it's so nice to see people. Thank you so much for coming out on. I was going to think it would be a hot day, but it's sort of a wet day, isn't it? Since it's a Fair of the Arts, I thought I'd start with I'm writing prose, a piece of prose I wrote about a picture that I saw in the Juniper Gallery. It's by an artist called Catherine Houghton. She lives in Crawfordsville. She's a member of the Indiana Artists, the Hoosier Salon, and the Athens Art Gallery. And her paintings have received awards, and I was very taken with this one. It's called Tomato. I'm in the Juniper Gallery with a writing group. I look around. Across the road is a Dawn Adams painting, Reflection of Prayer Flags. The prayer flags are reflected in a clear, shallow stream passing between bare saplings on the edge of a low bank. I decide to choose this painting to write about and set my pen to paper. But what is this, high up on the wall in an ornate frame, looming over me, glowering down at me, a fiercely red tomato. You don't think that tomatoes can glower? Excuse me, you haven't met this tomato. It is edged out of the sunlight that fills the front of the painting, a considerably smaller tomato, which looks a little bruised, probably from the edging out. Meanwhile, the bully tomato preens itself, glows, and knowing it has my attention, says, "Look carefully at me. See how I shine. See my strong, hairy stalk, my sleek curves, my red, rich fruitiness. I am the largest tomato you will ever see. There isn't room on your plate for me, so don't get ideas. I am here to be admired, to be freshened up with a mist of cool water. And see these pleats around my fine green stem? I am still expanding. I am on my way to become super tomato. No salad bowl for me. Beware, oh, still green tomatoes. Think no avaricious thoughts. I can detect them, and you will be plucked from this sacred place and thrown into the compost heap, where hungry rats lurk. So beware indeed." And it glowered still more fiercely. I stared at it, mesmerized, counting the pleats around the stem, then stopped and looked again, seeing not a larger pleat, but a crack oozing juice. Bully tomato was swelling out of its skin, yet it was still pontificating. "I will be in the tomato." Juice began to spurt. Hall of The crack widened. More juice spurted out, down bully tomato's sides. Tomatoes everywhere. It spluttered, and with a sudden jerk, fell to the ground. I heard a tremendous splat, then silence, then the scurrying of little feet, squeaks, squelching, lastly, slurps and clicks from sharp-toothed mouths. I turned away. Up among the vines, there was rustling. Would the greenness up there soon become pink? This is the painting that you will see up there. This is bully tomato. Now this is a very different piece. It's longer, and in a sense it's for Joan, who, when she heard the first part of it, said, well, how does it turn out? Well, she's going to find out how it turns out. It's a memoir piece. It's set in England in the 90s, and it's about a man who was important to me when I was growing up in England. It's called by his name, Mr. Diggs. My mother and I are sitting in deck chairs on the back lawn of a house out in the country where now she lives after her marriage to Bruce. The garden has for my mother everything she could wish for: long, dense, herbaceous borders, a rose garden, a vegetable garden with an asparagus bed, and a fruit cage. I'm visiting from the States. She's complained about how American I've become, so she's brought out a pile of old photograph albums, and I'm looking through them as she sits back and smokes. I come across a picture of my godfather, Mr. Diggs. There he is, short and sturdy, straight brown hair, large horn-rimmed glasses, with his intense, almost frowning expression. He has a beer glass in his hand. He is talking to my father, and I can almost hear that gruff, hesitant, deep voice, the jerky sentences, and then him giving his short laugh, almost a bark. I turn to my mother. Here's Mr. Diggs. He was nice to me, and I can see that he likes my father. Maybe, she says, but he lied to me. Lied? Yes, lied. She takes a deep breath. Yes, lied. Let me tell you. The telephone rings and she sits up. Damn, she says. I better answer that. It's probably your stepfather. She stubs out her cigarette, gets up stiffly and goes inside. Mr. Diggs. He has a garden too, even bigger than here. My mother, then a widow, and I would go for dinner. After dinner, we went into the garden. Long and narrow, it ran down to a stream with tall rushes. There were beds and beds of roses of all colors, trellised archways with purple climbing flowers, a walled vegetable garden with pear trees trained against one wall, a bed of asparagus, a rhubarb plot. Rather like Bruce's garden, I think. My mother comes back and sits down in her chair and lights another cigarette. That was your stepfather. He'll be late. So, tell me, how was Mr. Diggs nice? The book tokens he gave me. I still remember those visits to the Peacock Books. It was fun buying my very own books. My mother makes a little huh sound. And there were all those Sunday afternoons when he'd come by in his long, shiny car with a roof that folded down to take us for a drive. My mother interrupts. A Daimler, and he worshipped that car. I sit up, all the nicer of him, because I'd feel car sick and he'd have to pull over on a country lane to let me be sick in the long grass. And he'd buy us cream tea and try to talk to me, and I was too shy to say anything. Well, he wasn't much of a conversationalist himself, my mother retorts. But didn't you go on holiday together? I remember you saying how shocked everybody would be, and you laughed. My mother sits up abruptly, spilling ash on her blouse. He lied. He lied to me. I look at her puzzled. Lied? How? Everything was for your father, all for Anthony. When we were on holiday and there was no hanky-panky, I said, I hinted, and here she shakes her head and stumbles over her words, that we might, he told me that Anthony had asked him to take care of us. And with Anthony dead, he felt responsible for us. And you reminded him of Anthony. So all those drives and dinners and walks in his garden, the holiday together, were for Anthony. He lied. He lied to me. Oh, I know what you're going to say. Did he ever say anything that? But his actions, they lied. She jabs her cigarette into the ashtray and pulls herself up. He's got what he deserves. You'll see when we visit tomorrow. I'm going to call the dogs and walk them up the lane. I didn't get up right away. Then I get up and look around the garden. so like how I remember Mr. Diggs is that I wonder, did my mother want to marry a gardener, and now she has? I shake my head. And what does "he's got what he deserves" means? The next day, when we reach the main road, my mother turns the car left towards Bath, not Bristol, where Mr. Diggs' house is. I say, "Why are we going to Bath? I thought we were visiting Diggs." "Oh, didn't I tell you?" my mother says. "Diggs doesn't live in his house. He's had a stroke, and he lives in a Bath now, in a ground floor flat, with his man to look after him." "No, you didn't tell me." I'm angry, but I know better than to show it. As we drive on in silence, I think, is this what she meant by "he's got what he deserves"? We drive into Bath, and my mother turns into a circle of Georgian houses and parks the car. We go up the steps to a house with a black door, and my mother pulls on the bell chain. A middle-aged man with a serious expression, dressed in a dark suit, opens the door. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Davison," he says. "Good afternoon, Bryce," my mother replies. And before she can introduce me, I say, "Good afternoon, Bryce. I'm Antonia, Mr. Diggs' goddaughter, daughter of Anthony Stedman. I want my father to be present in some way." Bryce, inclining his head, says, "I'm pleased to meet you, Miss Stedman." And he opens the door to his left and gestures for us to go in. I lead the way, and there is Mr. Diggs. He's sitting in an upright chair in the flat's front room, staring at a wall with his hands on his knees. The room is bare except for the chair Mr. Diggs sits in, two more beside, and a table. Long black curtains are drawn across the tall windows, with light only coming through the fanlights above. He is shaved, his hair brushed, and is neatly dressed in a white shirt open at the neck, grey slacks, black shoes, but no glasses. We each pull up a chair and sit beside him. My mother says, "Hello, Graham, it's Beatrice, and I brought Antonia to see you." Mr. Diggs doesn't stir. I move my chair so that I'm facing him. His eyes seem to be looking at nothing. I say, "Mr. Diggs, I'm Antonia, Anthony's daughter, come to see you." But his eyes continue to stare straight ahead, expressionless. I go on. "I've been thinking of all the book tokens you gave me, and what fun it was going to the Peacock bookstore and choosing new books." But he doesn't respond. I try again. "And those drives into the country to have cream teas, and you never minded stopping if I felt carsick." But he doesn't respond. My mother, who has been fidgeting while I'm talking, hisses at me, "Don't go on trying. He never responds." She turns to Mr. Diggs. "Well, Graham, I'm glad to see you looking so healthy. Bryce takes good care of you." Mr. Diggs says nothing and doesn't move. I try again. Surely I can find something to interest him. I talk about the gardens in Victoria, Canada, about visiting my children in San Francisco, and the roses in Golden Gate Park, and how I enjoyed his garden, but I'm greeted with silence and stillness. My mother gets up saying, "It's been good seeing you, Graham, but we have to get home now." But I stay sitting. We've only just arrived. I want to take his hand, but know if he were well, that would embarrass him. But I try one last time. I've been looking at some old photos. There's one of you and Anthony, your friend, my dad, and you're drinking beer and laughing. Thank you. for being a good friend, and mine too. I look to see if there's a change of expression, but nothing. Reluctantly, I get up, saying, I'm living in America now, but I'll come and see you again. So it's goodbye just for now. There is no response. My mother is already leaving the room, and I follow her. At the door, I stop and turn back, but Mr. Diggs still sits staring right ahead. I feel like crying, but I don't want my mother to see I'm upset. We say goodbye to Bryce, and he lets us out, saying, It's been a pleasure, Mrs. Davison, Miss Stedman. I want to say something more, but I can't find the words. I follow my mother out and hear the door close behind us. At the car, my mother says, Graham was always so stubborn. He has the money to live in a nice place and have a doctor work with him, but he won't. He just sits there, and who knows if anyone visits him. He's all alone in that bare room. She sounds satisfied, a slight smile on her face as she says this. She looks at me, and you thought it would be different with you, talking about book tokens and car drives and telling him about the photograph. I'm angry, so angry that I want to shout at her, but that's what she wants, to see me upset. So I open the passenger door and get in, saying, We need to get a move on if we're going to have supper ready for Bruce. I've got one more short one to read, which is a little more hopeful. Now you know, Joan. It's about a friend, and it's a memory of that friend. Drowsy as a turtle. I read this line from May Sarton's February and think of you, Anne, now dead almost 10 years, finally escaping your dementia, and for whom the turtle was your special animal. And think too of the February day that my daughter Fran and I drive from San Francisco down to Fresno, pick you up from the nursing home, and we all go to the zoo. It's a chilly gray day, and you walk between us, your head hunched down under your jacket hood, saying nothing, not looking at anything, as we wander along the winding paths under arches of trees. And when I point out to you this or that animal, you turn a blank face to me. Then we come to an open place that trees circle, and there's a large, flattish, bare earth area with a low fence around it, and a small wooden hut at the edge farthest from us, with a pink glow coming through the cracks. A notice says, turtle. Below, a smaller notice says, this turtle is rarely seen in the winter months, remaining in its heated hut. Darn, I say quietly to Fran, and you know how Anne loves turtles. I turn to say something to you, and your face seems more alive, and you move closer to the fence, lean over, staring at the hut. Fran and I stand still, watching you for what seems a long time, when, unbelievably, a scaly head emerges from the hut, then a long, scaly neck, and out lumbers a giant turtle. Without hesitating, it rocks its way over to you, Anne, stops at the fence, and extending its neck, looks up at you, unblinking, and you, bending down a little, look back, your eyes locking. For long moments, you both stay that way, until the turtle slowly turns its head to the right. Fran, following its gaze, sees a metal bucket outside the fence. She goes over and reaches in, lifts out a head of lettuce, and bringing it back, holds it out to you, Anne. You take it from her, and turning to the turtle, feed it leaf by leaf. The turtle opens its mouth to each leaf, munches on it, and looking at you, opens its mouth for more. Fan and I stay still and quiet, watching. When the last leaf is eaten, you and the turtle look at each other for a long time. Then the turtle turns, and with its rolling gait moves slowly back to its hut. Before going in, it turns for a last long look at you, and then goes on inside. We all stand silent for quite a while. Then you turn to us, and there's a smile on your face, and your eyes are full of liveliness. Thank you.